Hi, Mom.
Hello, Alex.
Um, it's a little different from our rides back home from H Mart. We talk a lot. Um, so I don't have like a whole lot of like general questions I want to ask you, but I guess to start us about BTS. But I always wondered because it's something that you recently got into, because you're like in your 50s now, almost 60. What, why BTS and like why now?
Sure. So I think, I grew up in the 80s, and I was listening to a lot of American pop music. And I thought I was being sort of alternative by listening to a lot of, music like by Depeche Mode or New Order. So that was my thing. But I think recently, I started to watch Korean drama, and I really felt like part of me is in those dramas. And I think with music, particularly with BTS, the first song that I really listened carefully was Spring Day. And somehow all the feelings that I've had growing up in the US were somehow present in that song. And just listening to Korean words in that music, and also, the beautiful faces of these guys singing that song, I really was. First, I felt recognized, and then second, I was also very proud that they were Korean, and realizing that many other people found them, really interesting. I like their focus on, a lot of the mental health stuff, obviously, but also the way they really eschew a lot of the normative gender assumptions about what it means to be masculine for Korean men.
I guess earlier you mentioned that you were very much into like sort of alternative like music growing up in the 80s. Do you think that music, like the American pop, had any way like influenced or shaped the way I guess you saw things in America or in Korea even?
I think so. I mean, back then, we didn't really have Korean dramas or a lot of the Korean cultural influx. So for me, the quote unquote alternative 80s music did present a kind of countercultural, counterculture to American mainstream scene. So I do think that they also kind of politically influenced, right, how I saw things like racism or gender. So they were the sort of the precursor to shaping my political identity, I think. So I would not discount them right now either.
Was there any like particular music you wanted me as a child to like get into, or was there like, I know you only recently started getting into K-pop, but would me being into Korean music at a younger age be something that you had wanted, or into anything Korean in general at a younger age?
I'm not sure that I specifically angled you toward Korean culture or Korean K-pop or anything like that. I think
Right.
the way I was with both you and Josh was, whatever you found appealed to you at that moment, right? I know so that in terms of music, you have a very wide range of interest in music. I know you listen to a lot of R&B, for example, and even K-pop, right? There's sort of alternative scenes to K-pop itself too that I know you
Right.
share with me. So in that regard, I think music is something that an individual finds attachment to based on where they are at that moment in time in their development. Do I wish you had listened to Korean K-pop a lot earlier in your age? No, it's probably entered your life at the right moment, for when you were ready.
I know you mentioned already just like how you're really open with raising me and Hyunga. Was there a particular way of parenting that you wanted to implement when you were raising me and Josh, especially as like a single mother?
There was a moment where I know where a shift took place in terms of how I was raising you guys. And this was when we were living in New York, and Josh was maybe 8 or 9. And, I was trying to be the good Korean immigrant parent by having him take the violin and the piano lessons and, driving to this famous teacher 45 minutes and etc. And one day he was really upset and he didn't want to do his piano lesson, and he went into this rage, and I remember the look in his eyes, like he felt completely powerless. and was not happy. And it was also the same time that I read a book, Giving the Love They Want. And it was a psychology book on child rearing. And they were saying that children will have like 1,000 passing fancies before finding their passion. And it really released me from this this sort of obligation that I had to be a particular kind of Korean parent. And I was like, okay, you don't have to do any lessons that you don't want to do, right? And so I think because of that, you grew up with a bit more openness to, same thing with him. So for me, it's, I guess my one priority is I always wanted both of you to know that you always have a choice of not doing something, right? And even though I think obligation and responsibilities are still good practices, I think because of the way that I was raised too, and that I'm still struggling to find, I think one of the most empowering moments is when you know that you are not as powerless as you think you are. So Alex, I wanted to ask you, what was it like growing up, with a mother who claimed to be feminist and was practicing feminism and being a single mom working at the same time? Did you feel like you were missing something?
I think it depends on where I was. I think when I was in Oklahoma and I was really young at the time, and I think I just grew up surrounded by like a lot of white people and very like stereotypical family households, and I was also just young, so I didn't really know much. I think it felt like maybe I was missing like a fatherly quote unquote figure, right? And it was kind of weird to like not have something to like talk, like if fathers came up or something, or parents to work, whatever, it felt like maybe it was something missing, but it wasn't something that I think like made me feel bad or like I was like really missing out on life. I think when I was younger, especially with Hyunga there, I think seeing you having to work all the time, and I think for me that I don't know if it was admiration or if it was just like respect. I knew or like I felt like there was nothing to feel bad about there, because I think I could see that you were trying really hard to support Hyunga and I, and even though I didn't like as a kid, I wouldn't say like I wouldn't like be like at the time I was like not necessarily like rooting for you or something. As a kid, for me that felt like not cool, to like root for my mom or something, and be like you're working so those are things I just didn't want to say as a kid, but I could definitely I think feel that way growing up.
What was like having a feminist mother?
I will say that it was actually a benefit, I think, just academically, and I think it really shaped the way I sort of like viewed things like politically and whatnot, or socially even. And I think it was something that a lot of my friends actually respected. I didn't get shit on for having, being raised by a single mother who's like a teacher, feminist. I think a lot of people actually looked up to that and thought you were really cool. And that now too, even with my friends that I still have, when I tell them about you, like, oh wow, your mom's so cool. And then they meet you in person, like, oh my God, she's really cool. My current roommate or future roommate was telling me how she'd love to like, go to a cafe with you or something. And honestly, I don't think a lot of like, Korean kids can say that their friends want to hang out with their parents or something. So
how do you feel right now
about
in terms of like your identity, your sense of belonging?
I think this is something that a lot of people my generation, a lot of people are Korean, Asian American in general, ask themselves, because we're very aware of like, oh, what does it mean to be Korean American, right? And it's like, oh, it means you're too Korean to be like American, too American to be Korean. Yes, this whole shebang, like that's just something we run through all the time. And I'd say right now I feel comfortable being Korean American. I think people my age and my generation are starting to I wouldn't say like maybe find themselves, but just get comfortable with being, you know, with the fact that, you know, you belong on both ends of the spectrum, so to speak.
That's good because it sounds to me like, you know, when I was growing up, there was a more sense of loss, of invisibility. Whereas I think the question of visibility or invisibility is really not something that you're grappling with. You know, there's a kind of confidence and comfort with a kind of very fluid identity.
Maybe it's not for all of us then, because I also do want to recognize that I'm also very academically privileged. And so for me, right, personally, I think I can say that with more confidence because I've both read a lot, and I think with you as my, you know, parent, I've been able to have a lot of like introspection, right, and self-reflexivity to sort of grapple with things like invisibility versus visibility. You know, as a kid, I didn't know what made me un-American, right, and I didn't know what made me, you know, not Korean. I just knew, you know, like kids didn't know what kimchi was at the lunch table, right? I just knew that, you know, I couldn't speak Korean to like fellow church members, you know. And so it definitely felt lost, I think, in the beginning. But I think as I got older, I definitely became more confident. My wish for my mom, you know, I don't have a lot besides like be very healthy, you know, live long, not too long. Not just because I know she wouldn't want to live extensuously long, but also because, you know, I feel like it's after visiting, you know, Harmony in LA, she's, you know, I realize it's exhausting living that long, and I wouldn't want that for my mom.
We're of same mind. You know, being a single parent means that I always also have worries about the future and you know, constant worry about what will happen if something happens to me now, right? So before I went on this previous week trip, I thought, oh, you know, I could actually self-record something, even though I have documents, you know, like once you have it. So there's this perpetual and persistent concern about what will happen if something, you know, accidentally happens to me. And so I did record something, but I also wanted to let you know that should something happen to me, I also want you to live on in freedom and not be tied in sadness or sorrow, even though that is going to be part of the loss, that I'd want you to know that no matter what, I'll be rooting for you